Okay, we're going to go ahead and call to order the special meeting of the Gainesville City Commission for February 24th, 2015, as we take back up our selection of the City Auditor.
Move adoption of the agenda.
Yep, first thing is, motion is second. Seeing no lights for discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Roll call. We're all here. So, Ms. McBride, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Cheryl McBride, Human Resources Director. We're here to ask you to make a decision on our next City Auditor, if you're ready to do that. Before you start, I'll ask Ms. Norluck to share some comments with you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. As you know, we've been through a process here the last couple of days. We had 3 candidates that we interviewed for the City Auditor position. Yesterday, they had one-on-one interviews with you at large as a group. And then throughout the day yesterday afternoon, they had one-on-ones with 3 of the commissioners. And then today, the remaining 4 had one-on-ones with each candidate. We treated them to lunch downstairs, and we set them free from the interview process, and they've gone about their way. That said, I think it's been a very good process. I've gotten positive feedback from everybody involved. I want to thank the HR department and staff who have been involved in this process. Candidates were afforded a city tour yesterday. They met with the city auditor staff yesterday, and they were treated very well here in Gainesville. So thank you to all of you for that. That said, their interest remains very high in this position. I talked with them before I left them downstairs, and they all remain highly interested in the position. What we want to do here now is have some discussion about the candidates. I asked you yesterday to hold off until today and to even make notations in your interview materials relative to the strengths that you observed and saw in each candidate, as well as any areas of concern that you had. I think the one-on-ones after the group interview afforded you a time to ask some follow-up questions about any areas of concern that you have. So I feel confident that the process itself has played out well, and that you are as informed as you need to be at this point to move forward. Our goal now is to discuss these candidates and come up with either a selection of a particular candidate, perhaps more than one candidate, if that's what we want to do, and we'll talk about the next steps as far as moving forward. We do have ballots here if we get to a point of where we're ready to decide on a particular candidate and move forward, and we'll talk with you at length after the discussion about what the next steps are. Are there any questions at this point in time?
Any questions for the consultant? Seeing none, so I guess we'll just proceed by just opening it up for discussion among commissioners and see if we can come to an agreement. And if not, we'll reshuffle the cards. And if so, we'll be out of here in short order. First up, Commissioner Chase.
Mr. Mayor, I was going to ask with 3 candidates, I don't know if we need to do a ballot or not, but I have no problems talking about my experience yesterday. And so I think when I thought about what I was looking for and what we'd hoped, that we had a large pool of candidates early. We narrowed it down. We were able to get the 3 individuals down here, which I appreciate greatly. And I would say that I left and went home last night thinking that I possibly might have met one of the most impressive individuals that I've met in my life. And that's Mr. Holt, and I think he is very well suited for the job and the position. And I also had confidence that Ms. Hammond could assume the role as well. And I felt like Mr. Mossad probably is on his way there, but didn't necessarily have what I was hoping and looking for. And so for that reason, I mean, what I'd be prepared to do is move that the City Commission choose Carlos Holt as the next auditor and negotiate a contract with him. And if unable, to negotiate and execute a contract with Ms. Kelly Hammond.
I would second Carlos Holt, but Holt, and I'd want to discuss Ms. Hammond.
Well, I think you second the motion, and then we open it for discussion.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion to, and so we could just substitute as, this is the initial ranking by one commissioner would be Carlos Holt as first candidate, second would be Kelly Hammond, and then third candidate would be Magdi Masad. If I pronounced that correctly. And we'll go in order of lights.
Mr. Mayor, just so I
Sure, go
clarify,
ahead.
the purpose for my motion was at some point, I want to make sure that the process doesn't go beyond 2, if unable to come to terms.
Sure, I mean, I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to be clear.
All right, and Commissioner Poe.
Thanks. So, just some general comments. One thing I can say is that I learned different valuable information from each candidate, both at the live interview portion and our one-on-one portions. And what I would say is that I certainly reassessed my thinking between those two rounds of interviews. And I would say, the candidate who I thought was probably not a great fit for Gainesville after the morning sessions made me believe that they could do a great job in that role after my one-on-one session. The person who I thought might have had their best interview in the morning, I lost a little bit of belief that they're the right fit with the one-on-one interviews. And really what that means is they all kind of shuffled out being very close to one another, in my estimation, having different strengths and different weaknesses. And so that's good, because I think that regardless of who we end up hiring, I think we'll fill the position well and just bring different qualities. The order that I preferred was that I felt that Mr. Masad was the best fit for Gainesville, closely followed by Mr. Holt. And again, Ms. Hammond, I think, actually would do a great job. Her experience is very interesting in that she's been at the same place for a long time and been through an upheaval. There's a couple things with Mr. Masad that really stood out for me. The first is that he was able to translate his private sector experience into the public sector effectively, and then essentially build an auditing department from scratch. And that experience in developing a department, I think, would be valuable to coming into our department and being able to apply what he's learned in that to feel free to adapt it as he felt might be applicable under today's circumstances. He also, I think, has shown that he's able to handle the public and politically charged nature. I was very impressed with his ability to stand up to what in our parallel would be a fellow charter officer when he believed that there were sort of principles and ethics that were important, and not back down, but then let it go. Let the commission decide what direction they wanted to go once they had all the information, and that showed a lot of character on his part. I really liked what he said about transparency and no surprises. That really wanting to work collaboratively with the groups that he audits, but also try to solve the problems before they need to be cited in reports, and before there need to be recommendations made. He had some pretty decent utility experience and some interesting direct experience with some water utility issues that I think would translate well to our current conditions. And then I really liked what he said about co-sourcing audit experience when he didn't feel like he had a need. You don't just turn audits over to someone else, but you do them collaboratively. When he talked about ethics, he said a couple things. I first reviewed myself, and then I sought outside input. That evidence of self-reflectiveness I think is very important in a upper management or charter level position. Somebody that's able to show that they have the ability to self-assess and to ask for other people that they trust to help them with that. With that said, I think Mr. Holt's military experience gave him an organizational style that seemed to serve him well where he is in Nashville. I think that there are comparable jobs. I understand the desire to be the number one guy as opposed to all sort of second in command for another 5 years, which I'm sure puts him at the end of his career. I thought that his sort of approach towards how he conducts audits, whether he separates them by functions or departments and then establishes risk assessment, was very good. He seemed very well versed in the Yellow Book standards. The one area where I thought Mr. Mossad stood out was in the question of diversity. I felt like when all the candidates were asked about diversity, Ms. Hammond and Mr. Holt didn't really. It had not shown that they'd really thought about that aspect of the job very much. Whereas Mr. Mossad gave a very clear answer of the importance of diversity and why a more diverse staff creates a better work product. And he did seem prepared to answer that question as if he had thought about those things and applied them before. And that kind of jumped out at me. At the end of the day, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to support and vote for whoever the majority of this commission supports. I have no desire for this to be ultimately a divided vote, but my preference would be for Mr. Mossad and then Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much for your comments. Commissioner Henson-Rawls.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I too like Mr. Mossad. I liked his style. I liked his power for collaboration. The organized way in which he approaches the auditing profession. I felt all three candidates were strong. I commend the search consultant because I was challenged by making this choice. Carlos Holt clearly is a strong leader. I don't know, I could choose any of them, but I choose Mr. Mossad. I like the way he wants to integrate different departments to come up with solutions. He likes to find ways, he feels like he's a consultant as opposed to an auditor, that he has to create processes, put them in place along with the department before he even audits. He wants to set processes in place that will create the right internal controls prior to an audit. So that builds trust with the department. I also like the comment, transparency and no surprises. So if the department has helped in building the process, there should be no surprise. I like that. He's a chief fraud examiner. He's certified. He knew how to do data mining. We're literally paying somebody to do that for us right now. He knows how to do data mining. He knows how to track his recommendations. He knew 4 different technology systems that will assist us and him in creating an effective organization. Most of the candidates talked about one specific one, audit command language, whereas he talked about 4 and how to use them for different processes. I am a collaborator. Therefore, I liked his collaboration style. That was his premise for creating a good system of audit. It's as if it was a science unto itself, the way he spoke. And so I too like Mr. Mossad, number one. I would go with Mr. Holt next, even though I like Ms. Hammond equally as well. But Mossad is my number one candidate.
Thank you. And Commissioner Carter.
Yes, I'm a Carlos Holt first, and what it really impressed me was his confidence and his take charge, even in the initial interview. Also, in my one-on-ones with him, I was very impressed I asked him point blank, what would you change? What did you see as a problem before you got here? And he actually investigated it and knew the answers before he got here. He was the only candidate that really investigated the job and the departments. He gave me, I had my little list, and he answered my concerns right off my list like he broke into my office. So obviously I like the guy. I believe that Department of the Auditor needs a strong leader. I believe it needs to have that, and I do agree with the collaboration, and you don't want to go in as a bully by any means, but I think that when you go in there, you want to make sure that you're not being guided, you are taking charge and you're doing the audit. That's my biggest concern. I don't want all of a sudden, well, we went and had our steak last night, now let's do your audit, which could change your life. He made it pretty clear that he needs to keep personal life separate from the people that he's eventually going to be auditing, and that's a very military type of concern. I don't want to, separate that. Number two, Mr. Mossad, on paper, man, he's the guy. I got to be honest with you. On paper, he's the guy. When I was asking him what to do, what would you do, he always said what he has done. I said, I appreciate what you've done in the past, but knowing what you know now, what would you do with the city of Gainesville? And he couldn't come up with a good answer for me. He said, I think I would hire a couple of IT people. I think I would implement 3 or 4 new software programs. And I said, well, okay. And I just felt like he had some generic ideas versus a plan. And I felt Mr. Holt actually did an investigation and had a plan. And those are my top 2 picks in that order. But like everybody else, I can support both of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try not to repeat what I've heard before, because much of what I've heard, I think, reflects my own take on things. Just an overall statement of strength of all 3 candidates, I think very much so, having seen them both in the public session and the private session, and knowing how critical, particularly in our audit function, is not just the presentation, but also the ability to communicate with us, with staff throughout the organization. I felt very confident that all 3 of these candidates would do a superb job. I was also struck that all 3 of them specifically brought to issue things which I think we now, looking back, would say would have been great value to have had additional strength in the past, and which we're going to need to do in the future. The IT audit concept, all 3 of them expressly brought this up. They all expressly raised the importance of having a risk assessment tool, if you will, to be able to determine prioritization of what you look at. And I think there's no question that, particularly with the critical importance of the utility and how large the utility is relative to the overall organization, both in terms of our revenue source and otherwise, I've felt for a while that we could have benefited from a stronger risk assessment ability in terms of what we were looking at. When we looked at things, I think we've historically done a good job, but I think there's a question of whether or not we might have missed some things because we weren't ranking those priorities, and I felt like all 3 candidates highlighted the importance of that. A thing that I brought to my, kind of an assumption I brought in here, was the value of having a new perspective. And I felt honestly that Mr. Mossad and Mr. Holt offered the most in this new perspective. Mr. Mossad, having done a variety of different areas, not just the municipal, and Mr. Holt having this military experience as well as having worked in a larger metropolitan organization. I felt that both of them evidenced the strongest indication of bringing a new perspective. All 3 of them, I think, convinced me, and this is something I was a bit concerned about, was, okay, if we can get somebody who's a good leader, that's great, but can they build support within the organization, both first his staff or her staff, but also within the organization as a whole, because ultimately an auditor doesn't implement anything. They highlight, they communicate, they let us know more of what we need to know. And I felt all three of them convinced me that they would have a strong focus on that. And frankly, of the two choices, Mr. Holt and Mr. Massad, the one I was most concerned about in this area was Mr. Holt. Could he, in fact, build that support? Having had the one-on-one interview and also having reviewed the references, I've become convinced that he can, in fact, be both that strong leader as well as build that, emphasize the importance of getting a strong relationship across the organization. And so between the two at this point, I think I am leaning for Mr. Holt as my primary choice and Mr. Massad as my second choice. The final thing I do note that I did go in asking very specifically for evidence that they had looked into our organization. I think they all three did a good job of looking at the auditor's office and spending time in the auditor's office. But when I wanted to hear more sense that they kind of had gotten a feel for what were the issues facing the city more broadly, I felt that Mr. Holt had done a more specific job of establishing an understanding and awareness of the challenges we're facing and having some specific strategies to address those going forward. And so for those reasons, I think my preference would be Mr. Holt and as a backup, Mr. Massad. But again, all three I'm quite sure would do a superb job.
Thank you. Commissioner Warren, we haven't heard from you yet. Or are you still taking it all in, or you ready to go?
Let me go back to my notes. This was a new process for me. I haven't been in a position where I've had to hire anybody with the work that I've done in my life, being an independent contractor in most areas.
You hired yourself.
Mm-hmm. And hired myself more than once.
A good call.
I think they all three expressed a very in-depth knowledge of their field, where it has been and where it is going. With the process, as we've discussed, what we had with their meeting here in front of us yesterday versus the one-on-one, I felt very strongly that both Mr. Holt and Mr. Massad expressed a reflection of their field, and I'm having a real hard time choosing between those two. Ms. Hammond, in our one-on-one, certainly came back up with a lot of awareness, and I appreciated that opportunity to hear her explain more of her experiences and leadership style. My gut feeling is that since we here are of a changing position and role and personality, my concern then thoughtful process has been to think more about how is this individual going to work with the staff and the people and the changing leadership with the commissioners. And that's where it comes back to a feeling that I had while talking to Mr. Massad, that he just had a personality that I felt was more flexible with how he converses and the experience that he described, how he dealt with a very challenging position where there was obviously some things that needed to be corrected, and dealing with staff that had an old established pattern, and having to go through a process to keep finding different ways to get a connection with that individual. I felt like it reflected kind of like the role of a parent. With parents and with several different kids, you have to come at them with different approaches according to what their personalities. And that was something that I just felt that Mr. Massad reflected, the ability to step back, reflect on, is it my style or the person's style, and then come back with another approach to get the outcome that was needed. So I don't know if there's a way for us to weigh the three candidates to one, a half, and a point, and come up with a total score, and we shoot for the basket. I concur with pretty much everybody here that we had two. I think all three choices were great, but I find that there are two that seem to be coming up over, and I'd be happy with either of them. I just felt like Mr. Massad reflected a type of personality that I thought was a really good fit for Gainesville.
And before I go back, I'm offering some of my comments. And first of all, I join my colleagues in commending you, Renee, and Ms. McBride. You brought us three excellent candidates who would serve the city very well. All three. I feel very strongly about that. I think all three would take the office to higher level service. I think that's not a reflection of the incumbent. That's just they're bringing that new perspective, that a different So all of the good would be retained, and then it would just sort of take it up a notch, which is something I think we've talked about in all of our. Those are our goals. Those are goals for economic development. That's our goals for diversity. It's our goals for, everything we look at. We want to take it up a notch, and I think all three would be able to do it. So the first thing I say to my colleagues is, I don't think we need to do too much, trading here. We got some preferences laid out. We can vote our preferences and see where it goes, and then we can come back, and we can then do some creative balloting if we have to. But I think we can be confident with whoever we get. We're going to be pretty happy with. Now, with that said, I'll sort of lay out my perspective. I too took a lot of value from the one-on-one meetings. I thought the public answers were really good. I'm in favor of Carlos Holt as my first and Ms. Hammond as my second, and here's why. When you interview for a job, there's always questions you're going to get, that you should know you're going to get. And to me, the second question in our list was the most fundamental question that you can have, which is, what is the primary role of the city auditor? I mean, that's it. And Mr. Holt was without hesitation to carry out the public interest. And that is what it is. That's why we have an auditor, independent. All the other things, I'm not diminishing that. Anything else said, all of the other virtues are virtues. The collaboration, the working together, the bringing in IT and all that stuff. But if there's any hesitation about what the overriding purpose is to protect the public interest. That's why you have an auditor. And I think that was a key moment for me hearing that. It really set the tone for everything else I heard. I just felt that was very important. During the one-on-ones, I think they all three did very well. I was very impressed with Ms. Hammond. She struck me as a very tough-minded person. And we need someone in our auditor. I have no doubt that whoever's hired will maintain a professional respect and desire to work collaboratively with their fellow charters. But more important than any of that is that they're tough-minded and willing to stand their ground. Because it is the auditor's job, more than any other charter, that must protect the public interest. And so, again, I felt most confident with Mr. Holt, but I thought Ms. Hammond was right there. And those are the nature of my one-on-one questions. I didn't really have too many specifics. I just threw out some things. But and this may just be how we look at things. I think it's very important that we, as a body, hold our charters at arm's length. And I felt that it's the same goes with charters, that, yes, we have a professional standard. You will work well with your colleagues, but you also need to be able to hold their office at arm's length so that you have some professional distance. That is important to me. I realize that just may be me, but I think that's an important value. And so we talked about that one-on-one. And I just think, again, the example of the PPA from a couple years back, I just felt, I can't help but say, colleagues, that ran through my mind if we had Mr. Holt as our auditor or Ms. Hammond or someone like that. I wonder if we would have had different questions framed early on. We still would have had a contract. We still would have had a new fuel source. But I think the final product would have been greatly different because the public interest would have been, I think, more boldly protected, if you will. And that gets to where I'm going to conclude with my remarks with Mr. Holt, is that, I was very impressed with some of the comments that he made about the strategic, risk assessment of the strategic plan. we put a ton of value in our strategic plan. We hold retreats about it, and we always turn to the chart to the city manager and to the others that are responsible for implementing it, and we say, go ahead and we want the strategic plan implemented. We really haven't spent much on risk assessment. And I know pretty much all of the candidates addressed that. I just personally, it's my thing, I just was more impressed with Mr. Holt's approach to risk assessment within the context of strategic planning. I thought that was impressive, as well as being on the lookout for what he called lurking demons, which is a new phrase. I wonder if he coined that or if that's somehow in the nerdy auditing world. But that, honestly, folks, we could have if we had someone, with an eye out for the lurking demons for the past 5 years, things would be a lot different. So, with that said, I'm sure.
I just want to ask you a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You were here, and so was Commissioner Poe. So, when the PPA was developed, was audit consulted or just attorneys?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, first of all,
And
the mayor
maybe-
wasn't here, so you should correct that. He wasn't here.
Well, I was here when we sort of made the term, but then my term of office ended, and Commissioner Poe succeeded me.
Okay, so let me ask a different question to get the controversy out of this question.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Okay.
Jesus. So,
He
as a,
wasn't
pri-
here, so.
Well, I'm not trying. This should be the
Controversy.
issue. So, go ahead, Commissioner Henson-Ross. You have the floor. And then we have to actually. Commissioner Chase had hit his light, so definitely want to go back to that.
So the real question is, as I did ask one of the candidates yesterday about contract audits, the question is, forget the PPA, scratch that. Any contract, do we consult the auditor? Or do we only consult our attorneys?
My understanding is only if we ask them to. I don't think there's a default responsibility for
Right.
the auditor
Right.
to. Commissioner Poe, is that your?
Yeah, I think more recently we've asked the auditor to specifically be involved in certain discussions and processes, but it's not. I mean, when you look at the job description in the charter for the auditor, it is not specifically stated that it is their responsibility to review contracts.
But it may be something we might want to consider.
It certainly can be.
Sure. So, all right. So so concluding my remarks, okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to, if you don't, since you
No,
had a
go
conversation.
ahead.
That was very much on my mind when I had the conversation. And in every instance, part of it was, are we closing the barn door afterwards? Because I don't know that we'll ever have a contract quite like that scope. But certainly when I was asking about risk assessment, it was to expect that whoever we hire will be fully evaluating the potential risk of whatever's happening and bringing to us if there are things that we're not providing enough, either through our professional staff or our own judgment, attention to the potential risk to the organization. And I had an extended
I want to
conversation
address.
with that topic.
I think something where you
But this
were
is
heading,
this word of city auditor kind of implies that it's not the utility.
which is a question I asked in one-on-ones was, the difference between being reactive and proactive. And I think the auditor's office, again, by direction of us in the charter, is almost by definition reactive. You wait till the receipts come in, you calculate them. I think all three spoke of ways to be proactive. Again, it's my preference, just the way I interpreted that I felt Mr. Holt would have perhaps a better grip on that. But I do think Mr. Mossad clearly shows by his experience he has the wherewithal to do that too. Another thing I mentioned was the mentoring of staff, that you have to build a team. And I was impressed with Mr. Holt, who was, during a war, was teaching auditing classes while in the zone.
War zone.
I thought that was pretty impressive. But they all have some experience with that. But again, I just felt that that's where I came down. Again, I was very impressed with the overall caliber of all of the candidates. But that's sort of where I'm at right now. Commissioner Carter, you hit your light again?
Answered. It was
Answered.
answered. That's why I got rid of it.
Okay, so, Commissioner Poe. And then
Yeah, so there is a motion on the floor. I was hoping that Commissioner Chase would modify his motion since the preferred first or second option for the majority of us was Holt and Musad. I know that both of you guys like Hammond, and I did too, but
did too.
for the majority of the commission, Mr. Musad was either the first choice or the second choice. And so I would, I think it makes sense for
I thought
him to be the
a couple
backup.
approaches. One, we could ask for a modified motion. Second, we could divide the question and just vote on the number one first, and then take it up separately. But you have a question posed to you as the maker of the motion by Commissioner Poe, if you're willing to modify your motion.
Right, so it depends on what the process is. So if it automatically defaults to a 2, I mean, I don't think I would support the 2. So we've all seen different things here.
I think we want to make it clean
do
for
we need a
everybody.
2, I guess is my question. If we do, then perhaps what we do is
I think we settle on number one, and then we entertain a motion for number 2 after we vote on number 1. So we'll divide the question.
Okay. I'll just wait. Okay. That's going to be, that's unfortunate. I would modify the motion to just have Carlos Holt be chosen as city auditor.
Okay, seconder agree?
Yes.
Okay, motion and second. As Mr. Clerk, you got that? All right, and then we'll come back after. All right, any public discussion on the motion? All right, come on up.
I want to thank you for this opportunity. My name's Donald Shepard. I want to thank you for this opportunity. In an interview, I had the privilege of being here, and I apologize for walking out on Mr. Musad. I am regretful to say that Mr. Musad, from what I'm hearing, had some good values, which I did not get to hear, which would waver my opinion about all the candidates. But my choice of candidates would have been Mr. Holt. I feared his professionalism, and was right on to all technical details of the job. Ms. Hammond, she had the same qualities. Very hesitant, whether that was nervousness or what, was my second choice. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up about Mr. Holt was about his statement about, I could be wrong about this statement, about records, changing records to match the books. Those, which left a big question in my mind, whether this is a valuable person to exclude in this position. So my number one opinion still stayed with him because of his professionalism. They all showed great professionalism, so it's a very hard job for you commissioners to make this choice. And so as a city people's representative, this I do. I leave it in your hands, and I back you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any other members of the public for discussion, and seeing none, we'll close that period. And I see no other lights, so I'll go ahead and call for a vote. Let's do a roll call vote, Mr. Clerk.
Commissioner Carter?
Aye.
Commissioner Poe?
Aye.
Commissioner Chase?
Aye.
Mr. Ensign Rolls?
Okay, now what are we doing?
No, sorry. The motion on the floor is to select Mr. Holt as the number one for city auditor.
No.
Okay.
Commissioner Wells?
Aye.
Commissioner Warren?
Aye.
Mayor Bradding?
Aye. Motion passes 6-1, and we'll now entertain a second motion, Commissioner Poe.
Yeah, I move that we select Mr. Musad as our second choice candidate and authorize the mayor to negotiate with him if our negotiations with Mr. Holt are unsuccessful.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second to entertain that. Commissioner Chase.
Sure. I was surprised and happy about the level of comments everybody made. I would have led off with more detailed comments. So I want to share, I guess, what I think is the most important thing. It's a word, a couple people use the word. It's a word I used. It's a word that I've used up here quite a bit. And I know a former colleague who was here for one term used to give me a lot of grief about using that word. But it's a pretty simple word. It's called leadership. And I do think that's what we need here. I'll talk specifically about the very first audit that I was part of, which was the solar feed-in tariff audit when I first got in office. And what I'll say is I believe at the time that we had a charter officer who tried to intimidate and who tried to be a part of the process where he shouldn't have. And if you go and you read that audit, I think that's an example of what can happen at times. So I think the audit function is very important. I think that what my colleagues are going to learn recently is that we've had an audit. I might be wrong, but I think going on for close to 3 years, where hundreds of thousands of dollars of stormwater fees have not been being billed to properties because, I don't know, lots of reasons. There's always a reason. And I'm not sure to this day, again, why the audit takes so long and what some of the steps are. I think we need strong leadership. That's why, again, I guess if I hope we can work something out with the number one, and whether we get that with two, I guess was my concern, and is my concern. And it was more based on, I guess we all have different views of the experience in certain areas. Having said that, though, I think that since I've been up here, and I know I've watched it from afar, that supporting in a case like this, what the majority, and in this case, the strong majority of at least 5 feel is I'll support. But that is my biggest concern. I'm sure that everybody knows this, but we are losing the city auditor of many, many years. During this process, he has lost his most senior auditor just recently, and then the next most senior auditor will be leaving within 3 years, I believe, in the DROP program. So this is a functional area that's going to need strong leadership and guidance and development over time, and needs to be able to operate strongly and independently, and looking out for the best interests of us as elected officials and also the citizens. And so that's really the way I approach this, because we all have our own experiences and thoughts. And I felt that the number one was strongest there. And then for me, the 2 and 3, it was just about to me it was more the experience level and stuff. And it's all very subjective, and we've all got different ideas. So with that, I'll support this motion. But it is my very strong hope that we are able to work out something with the number one choice, as I believe it is desperately needed for the city moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Seeing no other lights or any members of the public who wish to speak to that motion. All right, seeing none, and I too, I expressed in my earlier comments that Ms. Hammond is my second choice. However, I will support the motion on the floor so that we have consensus here, and we'll move forward and act in good faith with both the top 2 candidates, and we'll see where we go. Mr. Clerk, you want to call for a roll call vote?
I'll start at this end this time. Commissioner Warren?
Aye.
Commissioner Wells?
Aye.
Commissioner Ensign-Rolls?
Aye.
Commissioner Chase?
Aye.
Commissioner Poe?
Aye.
Commissioner Carter?
Aye.
Mayor Brady?
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Clerk, on the first motion, did it need the enabling language of and authorize the mayor to negotiate, or do we have that covered?
I think it's part of the motion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll turn back to our consultant to wrap it up.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Commission. It's been a good process. I think we've made great headway in the process, and I do believe the city's in good hands going forward. That said, I will be working with you and the city attorney's office and whomever on putting an offer forward. Everything, of course, is contingent on background checks clearing and a little bit of housekeeping work that I need to do in the process. That said, thank you again for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. I mean, you brought us a short list, which honestly gave me initial cause for alarm, and but I think you really got three outstanding folks, and we're grateful one of them wants to, that all of them wanted to work for us, and we're grateful that at least one of them will.
And Mayor, I appreciate you saying that, and it's been a pleasure working with you. I always love when a process is so educational for everyone involved, the candidates and you, and also when it does stir some additional dialogue about maybe things to do differently. And, it should be an awareness process for everybody also. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chase.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I meant to bring something up earlier. It's more of a city commission issue, but I would ask us we all reflect on this process, that this is the second of two concurrent processes where we're hiring charter officers, where our consultants who do work around the country talk to us, or at least me, about the kind of the weaknesses and inadequacies of the Florida Sunshine Law as it relates to hiring people in critical positions. We have lost apparently countless highly qualified utility executives to show an interest, and it is my intention to refer something out of the city commission when I'm allowed to in a regular meeting, that we research this and understand this better, because it's
No, it's a special meeting, single item.
It's an interesting thing. I talk often about how the basic lack of trust of citizens and the fact that there are corrupt politicians, past, present, and will be in the future, have caused some of these issues. So they mean well, but it bothers me. This bothers me that we eliminate really, really good people. And in the private world, people have to take those steps where it's very hard personally to look at another job while you're in a job that you may, quite frankly, even still very much love. But I did want to, because I remember now this, we lost at least one of our 5 due to that, and perhaps others. And so, and if you have ideas or thoughts, and maybe this has come in the past, but I'm going to do something. I'm going to look into it as best I can, and get a better understanding also what the state legislature requires of us that they don't require themselves, because I will share with you that right now I may end up in prison, but I will not be doing the mandated ethics training that they have forced upon us either. And I look forward to seeing what the ramifications of that will be. Thank you.
Will be term limited out.
All right, yeah. All right, thank you for those comments. Seeing no other lights, we are adjourned.
Off the record.